Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of The History Of. This episode is something of a special one, as it marks the first part in a short series covering the United States military's woodland camouflage patterns. So yes, we're covering the US Woodland, aka the M81 pattern. But before we do, we need to jump back a bit to see how they got there. So to begin, we're going way back to the 1950s to a somewhat confusing and mysterious pattern. In this one, we'll be covering the reversible camouflage, commonly referred to as the Mitchell pattern. Now, some of you may be wondering, why start with this camouflage in this series when ERDL was created back in 1948? Although this is true, the pattern didn't really come into play until the mid-1960s. Don't worry though, we'll be covering that pattern and all of its variants in the next part. Okay, so the Mitchell pattern. After World War II, the US military really began looking into camouflage as an option for its standard uniforms. During the war, the military had performed a series of camouflage tests with a variety of patterns, most of which were hand-painted right onto uniforms. With a decent amount of success with the Marine Corps camouflages seen in the Pacific, the US was looking into how viable camouflage could be in other terrains and environments. And so in both 1948 and 1953, field tests were conducted. Held primarily in Panama, it was here that 8 camouflage patterns, with most being again painted right onto uniform pieces, were trialed. Though not much information is readily available about these experimental camouflages, 3 patterns stood above the others. Those 3 were Flock, which saw a good amount of success but did not move past the trial phase, the Wineleaf, and the Mitchell pattern. With these 2 patterns being adopted almost immediately by the Marine Corps under the name USMC Standard, these would first be seen on reversible shelter halves. The idea was that the predominantly green side would be used during the spring and summer months or in temperate and vegetative environments, while the brown dominant side would be used in fall and winter months, or in more dry and arid environments. Now these 2 patterns have quite a few names, so let's clear a few things up. The green dominant side is often referred to as wine or vine leaf, with some even calling it the oak leaf pattern on occasion. This side is technically called the USMC Standard pattern, though the name has also been used to refer to both patterns as well. The brown dominant side, on the other hand, has often been referred to as the clouds pattern, but its real name is actually the Mitchell pattern. But for the sake of time and preventing confusion, the name Mitchell is now synonymous with both patterns. Finally, on occasion, the designation P53 or Pattern 53 has also been used to describe these reversible patterns. See how this can get a bit confusing? So what's the deal with the name Mitchell? Well, today these 2 camouflages are often simply referred to as the Mitchell pattern. However, with the exception of one camouflage test report from 1962, the name hasn't often popped up in any real official capacities. The name Mitchell is also something of a mystery, as it seems to have no exact origin. Many have suggested it was simply named after the creator of the pattern, but others suggest it was named after an official who approved its use after the initial 53 field tests. If anyone knows of any documents or sources pertaining to the origin of the name Mitchell, please be sure to leave a comment or contact us directly. But back to the history. Between 1953 and 1959, the Mitchell would continue to be seen being used on shelter halves by the Marine Corps. But once 1959 rolled around, the pattern started to show up on M1 helmet covers. For the next few years, these would be used mainly by Marines, but that all changed once the US got involved in the ongoing Vietnam War. When US forces started arriving en masse towards the middle to late 1960s, the US Navy as well as the Army would begin using these helmet covers on a larger scale. During the war, the pattern found itself being used for quite a few things as well. Very early on, when the bulk of US forces in Vietnam were observers and advisors, a few trial Mitchell pieces were made for a series of camouflage and uniform tests. Not much is known about these trial pieces, but one of the more often seen are M65 field jackets, though a large majority of the ones floating around are custom or commercial pieces. However, uniforms in these camouflages were actually seen on a decent scale throughout the war. Primarily seen during the earlier years, the pattern was made into a number of different items by tailors in-country, as well as in Japan, specifically Okinawa. Such pieces included utility covers, jackets, pants, berets, boonie hats, and various other custom pieces. However, as the war progressed, these items would be seen less and less, as the only fabric available in larger quantities and sizes was that of the shelter halves. With thick, water-resistant material that caused the wearers to sweat and overheat in the hot and humid environments of Southeast Asia, large custom pieces would slowly be replaced by other patterns such as the various tiger stripes and eventually ERDL. So any uniform pieces that you may find out on the market today that aren't helmet covers or shelter halves are either custom-made ones from the Vietnam era, commercial pieces such as coats made by Camo brand, reproductions or fantasy pieces, and in the extremely rare instance, experimental pieces, as mentioned before. So what happened to the pattern? Well, the helmet cover became almost a symbol of the war. With the most popular side being the green dominant one, the brown was occasionally used, but more often so when troops were stationed at camps or bases, rather than during field operations. Although ERDL began to take off towards the 1970s, the Mitchell did stick around through the 1970s and into the 1980s. It would be often seen here and there, but most often it was utilized during training exercises, with one of the last being the first Bright Star exercise in Egypt. The pattern would eventually be retired alongside the M1 helmets in favor of the US Woodland Camouflage and Pasget helmet. However, it did occasionally pop up being worn by US forces from time to time. Not only that, but the two patterns had even been copied and used by other nations as early as the late 1960s. From 1967 to 1975, certain members of the South Vietnamese National Police were issued a uniform with a locally copied clouds pattern, which gained the unofficial names Leopard and Earth-Colored Flower, or Hao Mao Zat in Vietnamese. After the war, the vine leaf side was also used by Thailand, Indonesian airborne units, and certain Uruguayan Air Force personnel. Finally, the covers themselves continue to be sporadically used by other nations such as Saudi Arabia and Nigeria. Well, here we are at the end of part 1 of our series of US Woodland camouflage patterns. As always, we hope this video was entertaining or educational, or both. Be sure to subscribe or check back soon for part 2, where we will dive into the various ERDL patterns, right here on Uniform History.